What is up, everyone? Good morning. It's your host, Carlos Ponce, and this is another live episode of Advancio Talks. If you are just discovering us, well, welcome. But if you've been here since the very beginning, since 2022, you know what we're about. So Advancio Talks is where we sit down with the people actually building the future of business and technology. Not just talking about it, but doing it. CTOs, founders, the folks making decisions that matter in different verticals. So whether you're drinking coffee, commuting, or just curious about what's actually happening in tech and finance and other areas in business, stick around because today we got Hylton Irons, and he's an investor at Distributed Ventures. And Hylton's got stories and insights you won't hear anywhere else. So let's jump right in. Welcome to the show, Hylton. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Carlos. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to chat to everyone that's watching or listening, and really excited to dive in.
Absolutely. So let's start with the most important thing at the very beginning. You tell us a little bit about you. Anything you want to say is fine. Tell us a little bit about so that the audience can know who you are, what your story is, etc. So
yeah, happy to do. So as Carlos mentioned, I'm an investor at Distributed Ventures, based in Chicago. I started out. I was born in Maryland, East Coast kid. Spent a lot of time early in my life, thinking about tech and thinking about the future, and wanting to be sort of close to the front end and the kind of innovation. And so, after undergrad, I kind of dovetailed that with finance, I would say. And so spent some time in investment banking and then spent the last 5 years or so, almost 6 years in early stage investing across technology, consumer, and now more InsurTech and Fintech and healthcare. And so that's a little bit of kind of about me, about my background. But I really enjoy being close to innovation, thinking about what the future holds across a lot of different areas, and trying to support folks along that kind of builder journey.
Great, that's awesome. That's quite an undertaking. So tell us a little bit about Distributed Ventures. So how did it come about? What was the genesis of the company? Why did you feel, hey, I'm going to put this together, I'm going to get it out, I'm going to build on it? So tell us a little bit about the company.
Yeah, so Distributed Ventures, we are a early stage venture capital firm, typically investing in seed and Series A stage enterprise companies across InsurTech, broader Fintech, and healthcare, right? And so we're typically leading seed Series A rounds, often taking board seats or working really closely with those founders to help support them with distribution, help support them with capital, help support them with strategy as they sort of go along the growth journey. The genesis of the company. So we started out actually as a venture fund within NFP, NFP, so mid-market insurance brokerage, and that was an initiative that NFP wanted to lean more into innovation, make direct investments in places that were relevant in their business, and after being under NFP for a while, we ultimately spun out of NFP, became independent, and became kind of Distributed Ventures as we are today. We still have a close relationship with NFP, as well as other organizations across sort of the distribution, carrier, healthcare, and kind of broader traditional investing landscape, I would say. But that was kind of the genesis of what is now Distributed Ventures.
Great, awesome, perfect. So I look forward to learning more throughout the course of the conversation, of course. But now I would like to move on to today's topic, right? Because well, you told us about your background, told us about your company, but we're going to be discussing something in particular, which is, and I'm kind of intrigued about the word choices that you made, because it's interesting, right? It's intriguing. So we're going to be talking about betting at risks frontier. Okay, so the venture thesis connecting InsurTech, Fintech, and digital health through innovation in risk. First
Mhm.
question that I have for you is why did you choose this particular topic and why did you feel it was relevant for this day and age?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is an interesting lens on uh, the world more broadly in terms of sort of technology. I think enterprise sales and SaaS generally. I think that thinking about risk as something that underpins a lot of businesses, et cetera, is actually the way that I think conceptualize insurtech and insurance as kind of a concept when I first started getting into the industry and started investing in the industry. So when I think about, how the frontier of risk interacts with, insurtech, fintech, digital health as categories, um, I think you have to think about like frontier as the category is still being defined, right?
Mhm.
So um, if you think about something in obviously AI, but let's say like liability insurance for AI, or the constantly shifting like regulatory rules for supervision of AI usage in by
Mhm.
carriers, for example, right?
Yeah.
Like this is something that's generally still being defined, and that's kind of how I define being at the frontier of risk. I think when you think about the three things together, those three main verticals, understanding risk is a core competency to build, I think, a successful, enterprise, a successful business, a successful product across all three of these layers. Specifically insurtech, of course, but even across, digital health, for example, not just across health insurance, but across, the risk of, you know, health challenges, for example, is something
Mhm.
that we all think about intuitively without maybe defining it in that way. And if you think about the kind of the health system operates kind of through that lens.
Mhm.
And so those are kind of specific examples of why I think that sort of framing of risk and being at the frontier is really interesting way to look at kind of these three companies and to look at, how to build something successful in that space.
Right, right. Um, Hilton, tell me something.
Yeah.
Most investors, let's say, pick a lane, right, and
Hmm.
stay in it. But you're active across frontier risk sectors and consumer categories simultaneously. Was that breadth a deliberate strategy, or did it develop organically through the deals that you kept finding yourself drawn to?
Yeah, I would say it developed organically in terms of sort of my personal background. So I've always been interested in, understanding where the future is going. And then if you're working backwards from there, how do you sort of, capture capture that momentum, right? And so I think
Mhm.
when I was doing more consumer investing in the past, um, I was always thinking about, who the end buyer is, what does the distribution methodology look like to get to them,
Mhm.
um, and what will be true about the world in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years that will allow this sort of venture to be compelling or exciting. And I think
Mhm.
in a consumer context, it could be that people are going to drink less alcohol, but still want the taste of beer. So, non-alcoholic beer might be an interesting category to invest in, now for 10 years down the line. I think in the context of what I'm doing at Distributed Ventures, which is, InsurTech, FinTech, digital health, it's the same kind of core set of things that you're thinking about. Who is the end user? How are they getting distributed to? Obviously, in insurance, that's very different from in healthcare, but there are a lot of similarities. And what will be true about the world, or what do you believe will be true about the world in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years that
Mhm.
makes this a good, exciting place to support and invest in? And so there are through lines, I think, across probably every category that a venture investor can invest in. And I think
Mhm.
those through lines are sort of the end user, the distribution, and what will ultimately be the value. to the person or
Mhm.
organization that you're selling to. And so that's how I kind of bridge the, my prior consumer experience with what I'm doing now. But obviously there's crossover even in like digital health. A care delivery business can be, consumer, and it can also be enterprise. If you think about B2B2C, for example, an insurance business can be a consumer, going directly to consumer to insure, or
Mhm.
it can be, commercial going through broker channel, et cetera. So there's overlap, but I think it helps. I think it was an organic development, in terms of areas that are really interesting and compelling to invest in.
Okay. Okay. I really want to dive a little bit more into your investment philosophy, but before we go there, there's something else that I wanted to ask you. And again, it's the word itself that resonates. It's like it's right there screaming at me because I want to ask you
Hmm.
about this. The distributed ventures, correct me if I'm wrong, okay, but I believe
Hmm.
that distributed ventures positions itself at the frontier of risk. I want to
Hmm.
ask you, what does frontier mean to you in practice, and how do you know when something is genuinely at the frontier versus just being marketed that way?
Yeah. So I think that's a great question. So I think frontier, uh, to me, means, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, that the category is still being defined. I think how that shows up in practice and how you sort of evaluate, with that framework, what does frontier look like? I think, think about the existing infrastructure, whether that's regulatory or technical infrastructure or something like that.
Hmm.
If you think about the existing infrastructure and then you're looking at a specific company or a specific kind of a theme area, you kind of ask yourself, like, is this, technology or infrastructure already being built? Uh, is it sort of changing in the current moment? Um, will those changes have like large downstream effects? If the answer to any of those, I think, is yes, then you're at the frontier.
Hmm.
Um, I think that you could see a lot of, successful or impactful companies built as, better, improved versions of things that already exist. But I think if you're looking at the underlying technology or underlying infrastructure, you kind of have the question of, is this changing in the current moment, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
how fast is this changing? And what does that mean for all the stakeholders in that, environment or system? So that's kind of how I think about the frontier in practice. I mean, AI is the most kind of obvious frontier technology.
Right.
And I think that if you ask that question, things are changing extremely rapidly, and will have a lot of downstream effects. But I think even if you're looking at let's say you're looking at a biotech company, which we don't invest very actively in, but let's say you're looking at a biotech company and they have developed, discovered a new sort of gene structure or genomic structure that allows them to create, a specific type of medication. Like that is a frontier, right? Because it's net new and it's kind of changing in the moment.
Absolutely. Thank you for elaborating on that part because like I said, I was dying to ask you about specifically the frontier part, is because it can mean different things to different people. Thanks for clarifying
Mhm.
that. So
Yeah.
I want to dive a little now. Let's shift gears a little bit. I want to talk to you. I would like to ask you about your investment philosophy. Okay.
Hmm.
First question I have is I understand that you, excuse me, that you invest in, let's say, female founders and diverse founders at a notable rate. So, is that a values decision, a returns decision, or have you found that the two are impossible to separate?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I look across my investing history, not just at distributed ventures, but for me personally, I think that is, um, I think that it's both, right? So I think that when you think about sort of investing and having like a, distributed risk across your portfolio, it's really important to invest in a lot of different categories and a lot of different
Mhm.
areas and a lot of different people, right? Like
Okay.
diverse perspectives and people that are diverse whether that's by gender or by race, like diverse perspectives breed, diversified risk and breed really interesting and different ideas, because like our ideas that we generate, come from our experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's sort of the returns driven, I think, perspective around, why investing across a diverse set of people is important. Um, I think from a values perspective, I also believe that, it's important to see those opportunities to be, defined about wanting to invest across a wide range of people. So I think that it's both to answer that
Mm-hmm.
question. And I would say that that's certainly something that we think about at Distributed Ventures as well as everywhere that I've ever kind of invested.
Mm-hmm.
Because and this might be leading to more of like the investment thesis and how you evaluate, but
Right.
at the early stage, which is where at Distributed Ventures we spend all of our time, the people, the team, the founders are where we spend the most time, right? Like that is the sort
Right.
of biggest factor. And so you can't divorce that from that person's background or that person's identity.
Yeah, and the way you put it all, like in the last 3 4 minutes, is a great. I think it's a great explanation of your investment philosophy. That tells a lot about what makes you tick when it comes to what the whys of the whys of investing, right?
Mhm.
So and I'm sure there's more questions about that part, but we don't have enough time, unfortunately. So I want to move on to something else that's a little bit more specific. Let's talk about fintech, insurtech, and digital health. Okay.
Right. Right.
So, first question that I have about this is the three ones I just mentioned, the three spaces I just mentioned, fintech, insurtech, and
Mhm.
digital health, are three industries that all touch people at their most financially and physically vulnerable moments, right?
Right.
So is that overlap intentional in how distributed ventures thinks about the portfolio, or is it a coincidence of where the best opportunities happen to cluster?
Yeah. Great question. So it's definitely intentional. I think the thing that underpins one of the things that underpins those three ecosystems, besides being physically vulnerable, which is very true, or financially vulnerable, is I think those industries are sort of anchored on risk transfer in some way. So if you think about kind of the history of DV and us sort of coming out of a relationship with NFP and having that kind of perspective on things, uh, we think a lot about people's health from like a health
Mhm.
insurance standpoint, or from a employee benefit standpoint. A vast majority of people get health insurance via their employer, right? So that's relevant. We think about healthcare from a payments vertical and payment standpoint, and so fintech becomes really relevant. Different technologies and different ways that folks are paid become really relevant. And so I think those three verticals are not dissimilar and not disconnected. If you look at it from the perspective of how are folks actually, who are the key stakeholders across all of those industries, and you know, how is the product being delivered, right?
Mhm.
Healthcare is delivered in a way that's not very dissimilar to the way that insurance is delivered. Insurance is in like protection is the way I like to think about insurance.
Right.
Um, And fintech is kind of the rails for how those things are delivered and managed, right? And
Mhm.
so, we also invest in, wealth tech and kind of the wealth tech ecosystem, for example. We've also done investments in, employee benefits world, or almost kind of HR tech. All of those things are kind of part of this sort of one ecosystem around the three verticals that you mentioned. And so it's certainly intentional. Uh,
Mhm.
I also think that there are a lot of opportunities across all three. And so as investors, we certainly like to spend time where there are a lot of exciting opportunities, a lot of interesting, founders, a lot of innovation. Um, and so I think they're connected.
Mhm.
And the way that's kind of the lens at which we look at them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's an internal talk. There's an internal conversation here at Advancio about the messy middle, the place where
Hmm.
legacy insurer infrastructure and modern startup ambition collide and slow everything down. From your
Yeah.
side of the table as an investor, how much does that technical debt problem factor into how you price a deal?
Yeah. Good question. I certainly agree that we see the messy middle show up in our day to day in terms of the companies that we're looking at, portfolio that we're working with, the enterprises that we're connected to and that we speak to and that are in our network. I mean, I think that I wouldn't necessarily say that technical debt factors very heavily into how we price the deal. I think the way that I would put it is that we think a lot about the perspective of the buyer when we're talking to a founder,
Mhm.
and the priority set of that buyer. So, InsurTech is famous for having long sales cycles. Enterprise broadly is famous for having long
Mhm.
sales cycles, right? Um, or having a lot of inertia uh, to the tech debt point. And so, maybe a company that is selling a solution that doesn't require the customer to rip and replace may result in a faster sales cycle, right? And maybe that, and so something like that we'll sort of look at, and that'll help us determine, um, how much money, how much capital the company might need to get to a XYZ position, how we can be most supportive in, enterprise conversations and sales conversations, helping them define like a replicable sales motion and strategy. Um, and what the kind of future capital path of that company might look like. I think those things factor into, you know, how you price a deal, right? But I think the thing that we focus most on is, you know, where can we be most supportive along with capital,
Right.
to support them.
Just give me one quick second here, and there's something that I need to fix. Sorry about that. There was a sudden interruption here that I had not foreseen, but the good thing is that we are live, and the bad thing is that we are live. So, yeah, we can always
Yep.
trim down the interruptions in the recorded version. So luckily, we're going to do that afterwards. So something that I want to ask you also is about it's about digital health.
Hmm.
Digital health sits, the way I see it, is it sits at the intersection of regulation, reimbursement, and consumer behavior. So three of the
Right.
hardest things to move at once. So what makes you say yes to a digital health bet when so many of the variables are outside a founder's control?
Yeah. That's also a great question. Very, very nuanced, right? I think the one of the more important things is one that the founder has a very, you know, clear perspective and view on all the things, the variables that are outside of their control. And the crux is they have a path that, roots around the biggest external blockers, or a very clear thesis on, you know, how to get through them head on, right? Uh, the founders we're investing in founders, right? Especially at the early stage. And they're the one driving the business. We're excited
Mhm.
about founders that knowing that they'll hit hard points and things will often have to evolve or pivot. I think the thing we look for most is kind of an understanding of the ecosystem at large, the different kind of incentives and key stakeholders, and all the
Mhm.
things that they can and can't control. For example, in healthcare, for example, like, you know, tech budgets in health systems are, notable for being tight and slow moving in terms of process, et
Right.
cetera. And so if you're a vendor, I think it'd be interesting to think about, what are ways that you can sell to health systems and access, pools of capital that might be different, might be outside of the traditional vendor pool, right? Uh,
Mhm.
for example, that might be, the, malpractice risk pool if you're selling a solution that, helps reduce malpractice liability for the system if it's like a level funded health system, right? That's an example of trying to, go around or go through some variables that are outside your control.
Mhm.
And maybe you have a faster sales cycle and you see revenue come through faster than you would if you didn't kind of have that insight. So that's kind of I'd say that's a specific example of sort of a way to think about, digital health and how you evolve and navigate things that are out of your control. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're kind of coming up on time, unfortunately. I mean, time flies when you're having a good time usually. So,
Right.
but we still have time for a few questions. I'd like to touch a little bit on the technology and the talent and the build side, right? So, for example,
Mhm.
companies like Advancio exist because insurance and fintech projects require builders who understand both the technical and regulatory sides of the product. When
Right.
you're evaluating a seed stage insurtech or fintech, how much weight do you put on whether the founding team has that dual fluency?
Mm-hmm. Um, I mean, a lot of weight, right? Like I think the way that I think about it, to zoom out, is that the organization, especially in fintech or insurtech, needs to have the dual fluency, right? And so, for being a founder at the early stage, it's great if the founding team has that dual fluency. I think that what's very important is, if not, that the founding team is aware that they don't have the dual fluency or don't have fluency in certain areas, and are really focused on building that in house, whether that's oftentimes from an industry veteran hire or something like that, right?
Mhm.
um, I think you want to have founders that you want to have founders that have a sometimes have like an outside or like innovator perspective, right? Like that's historically has been important in venture, but you also want to understand the infrastructure, the regulatory, like the ins and outs. How do you sell to a certain type of industry? And that's very important, as you all know, in insurtech specifically, as well as in fintech and healthcare.
Mhm.
um, so the founder doesn't have to have the dual fluency, but the team needs to have a dual fluency perspective.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, now it's time for me to, and I love this moment because I'm going to put you on the spotlight here.
Great.
I'm just kidding. At the beginning, I mean, when we were off the air,
Mhm.
we were chatting, and we were talking about AI. I mean, it's unavoidable, right? I mean, AI is everywhere, so we need to talk about AI, at least touch on it a little bit. So AI is being applied to underwriting, claims
Mhm.
processing, and risk modeling all at once right now. So, as an
Right.
investor at the frontier of risk, are you more excited or more skeptical about what that actually delivers in the near term?
Great question. I'm excited. I think I lean more excited than skeptical. That might just be natural to my nature as a
Uh,
venture investor. And so what I'll say is that I think that the most important thing for near term ROI or results for the ecosystem and for the industry is integration, data fidelity and
mhm,
like safety. And so I talked about this a few weeks ago at a conference in New York, but supervision and guardrails around AIs potentially making mistakes, models potentially making mistakes is I think the most important thing to see sort of near term results.
mhm,
Um, because when you think about sort of the promise of AI, it is, at least at the first level, being able to, you know, allow machines to do a lot of the knowledge work that folks have been doing so that they're freed up to do other things, right? I think the difference, and this is relevant for insurance especially, is you can hold humans accountable. There are structures at which to hold humans accountable when mistakes are made. There aren't really structures to hold technology accountable when mistakes are made. And so there's kind of a whole insurance and protection ecosystem around it with like, cybersecurity, for example, things like that. Because AI has a black box that's non-deterministic, you might not get the same result every single time. I think it's just very important to have, whether it's human in the loop, whether it's kind of a multi-agent system, some structure and guardrails around for safety. And I think that's where a lot of the conversation has been for around the table for us in insurance specifically. But I do believe, I think everything is happening so fast and the tech is advancing so fast that we will see value in the near term. And I think that's starting to happen already, right? I think there's still very much human in the loop, but I think there will be value in the near term. I think that the long-term value will probably dwarf the near-term value. But I'm cautiously optimistic going forward.
Excellent. Thank you. I have one more question, and I'm sure that there might be a couple of folks out there who are just going to kind of, stop what they're doing, and they might be just wanting to listen in, because this is, from my perspective, this is interesting. If you had to point to, let's say, one category sitting at the intersection of fintech, insurtech, and digital health that you think is still dramatically underinvested right now, what would it be and why?
Good question. I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is, it actually goes back to a point that I made already. So data, I'll call it data translation. And what I mean by that is putting the data, the massive amount of data that we have, in a format where we can most efficiently get the most impactful insights from it. I think that's a big kind of promise of AI. And I think that the kind of earliest things that we've seen have been lower hanging fruit that AI was able to do more easily. But I think when you think about data translation, I think that there's a world where all the data that my body produces and blood tests and all of these things is sort of readily available at like the doctor's hands or my hands or what have you, and in an efficient sort of cheap way. I think insurance, which we talked about underwriting benchmark, for example, or workbenches. I mean, data mine, right? But a lot of the data is unstructured, siloed, not in a way where it's easy for machine learning or AI to translate. And I think the investment in that translation has to be pretty niche and industry specific. Like we've seen a lot of big companies get funded around, data mapping and data tagging for like the large language models to use, right? But I think there's an industry specific layer that we haven't gotten yet that gets into your point around, needing to have industry veterans at the table, or folks that really understand the ins and outs. I think data translation within each specific industry is something that we'll still see a lot more investment.
Absolutely. Hylton, we ran out of time, unfortunately, but I want to ask you, this is your time to shine also, because I want to ask you to leave the audience with your own personal final words of wisdom for the audience. What would you like to leave them with as a final words, as a final message?
Yeah, I think that the world's changing very rapidly. I think we're very, it's very unlikely that we all kind of exist in the time where this is happening very rapidly. And so I think it's helpful to sort of, come out of the weeds every so often, and, think about things from a higher level. And I think that'll help us have more perspective in our like day-to-day work and where the future is going, and, how we can build differently, et cetera. So I think that's the message I want to leave. I have always been into, space, for example. Right. And I think, I guess think about like the wonder of technology and of AI. I think it's very easy for everyone to kind of to get used to it. And I think I'm used to it. But I think it's sometimes it's helpful for creativity, for innovation, to think about all the wonder that comes with, what technology is able to accomplish now. And I think having that perspective every so often will be helpful for everyone working in the ecosystem.
Definitely. So, great. I'm sure there's a lot. We run out of time, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who might be listening now or will be in the future, because we are recording this and we'll be promoting it over the next few weeks very heavily in social media. So, how can people reach out to you, like LinkedIn, website, email? Can you share your info, please? I mean, you're on LinkedIn, I assume, right?
Absolutely. Yes. So I am on LinkedIn. My URL is go to linkedin.com. It's actually right there, Hylton-Irons.
It's right there. It's right there.
Hylton, Hylton with the Y. So if you search that, I don't think too many will come up.
It's Hylton with the Y dash
Irons.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
Got it.
And what about, is there a website that you can share?
Yes. So www.distributedvc.com. That's distributedvc.com. That's Distributed Ventures website.
You have the website right here, folks. Make sure you make a note of it. And also, is there an email that you use?
Yes. So it's Hylton with the Y at distributedvc.com.
Yes, I got it right here. So there you have it, folks. If you want to reach out to Hylton for more about Fintech, InsurTech, the venture capital, and then all the things that we talked about today, make sure you reach out to him directly. And Hylton, it's been a great pleasure to have you on the show today. So the only thing left for me to do is give you a huge, heartfelt, warm thank you for having been with us on the show for 30 minutes of your life today that you kindly shared with us, because you're not getting them back, right? So you're not getting them back, but we're going to give you something. Okay. Hylton, please stay with me as we go off the air, okay? And for those of you who are watching now, remember that on Wednesdays at 11 o'clock Mountain Standard Time, we have conversations with tech luminaries from many spaces and verticals. And this month is all going to be about InsurTech, Fintech, venture capital, and other areas of interest to the general public that is interested in these topics. So just remember, just keep an eye on advancio.com/tech talks. Tech-talks. It's not tech talk, it's tech talks. So that being said, Hylton, thank you again for having been with us on the show. Stay with me, and the rest of you, see you next week, same time. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.